And then, in a moment of curiosity and childhood madness, I suppose, but I decided to rub the fixed vapor into my eyes. You know, my face was sort of covered in the flood of tears, and I remember running through the camp and trying to find my mother. I also remember seeing the planes that would come to deliver much-needed aid, for example, the World Food Programme, and I remember running around with my friends, sort of following these planes as they would fly above us. And, you know, refugee camps are obviously a very difficult place because there are lots of people who are in very difficult situations. There's little food, there's often no shelter, no access to medicine. But at the same time, as a child, I remember the experience also being fun. It wasn't all pain, doom. There were also moments of joy, and there were moments of games and laughter, because even inside a refugee camp, people still retain that humanness, that thing that makes us who we are, you know, family, friends, laughter, jokes.
When did you leave Hatishek?
I eventually left Hatishek in the early 90s, but it's something that has cast its shadow over me in a sense, to the extent which drove me to want to go back and to see what was left at this refugee camp, this place where 600,000 people once called home, that was home, to see what was left after it closed in 2004.
So you're talking now about your revisit in 2019. When you got there, what did you find? What remained?
I had a very distinct memory of Hatishek refugee camp being this dusty place of confusion and fear. It was so etched in my mind. It was red dust, and it was sort of, the ground had this sort of cracked Martian hue, and it was this sort of impossible place, and it felt like it went on forever and ever. And I just remember this endless landscape that drifted into the distance. So when I returned in 2019, I expected to find this, but I was surprised, and I was perplexed and confused. When I got there, I forgot that it was actually the rainy season in Ethiopia in June, and when I got to the camp, I found nothing but endless expanse of lush greenery, this beautiful landscape, and the people that I met were these nomadic family who lived there in their little huts called bulls in Somali. And there were this group of Somali nomads who were following their camel in search of green pastures and water. And I was really shocked because I wasn't prepared for that at all.
And how did they greet your arrival there? They didn't see you as a refugee child at all, did they?
They sort of greeted me as a foreigner, you know, and they were curious as to why I had made this long journey from London to come all the way to this small little place on the border between Ethiopia and Somalia. And when I started talking to them, they started to tell me the memories they had of what life was like in the camp. I met this man who was one of the caretakers of the camp, Mohammed, and he remembers the tens of thousands of people in 1988 suddenly arriving. And he remembers the desperation, the fear, he remembers people dying, he remembers the hunger, he remembers all those things. And then he also remembers how the camp eventually became a town, you know, shops, there was a market. And then he remembers in 2004 when people eventually went back and left the camp, and the quietness that descended on the place, and the fact that the buildings that are still standing there, you know, were sort of left to decay.
In your piece entitled Letter from Africa, you wrote that you were disappointed that there was no physical or shared memory, if you like, of your lives there, of the lives of 600,000 people once.
That is right. Nearly every records that existed in the country were destroyed because of war. People don't have birth certificates and passports, family photos. I literally have about 5-6 family photos that my whole family have. How can one construct a sense of who they are and where they've come from with so little material to go on? And also because we're an oral culture, stories are told through family members, and many of them are now very elderly, so don't remember so well, and many of them are also gone. So as an adult trying to look back and reconstruct this experience, I don't have the records to go on. So it's really hard to sort of get a sense of where you've come from.
And, anyone listening to this who hasn't been through that experience, like myself, it is hard to grasp what you just said. Just 4 or 5 family photos and no documents, no certificates.
It is very hard, David, because we place such emphasis on a birthday. We place such an emphasis on, marriage certificates and passports and family photos. These are the anchors that mark our identity. In a country like Somalia, that is completely missing.
Ismail Inashe speaking to me from Nairobi. If you'd like to hear more of his story, you can find his letter from Africa at BBC Online. It's called Somalia's Christmas Birthdays and Lost Memories. This is The Fifth Floor. I'm David Amano. Now, usually I know what's up ahead in the program, but today I'm really not sure because after 9 good years, this is my final program. And it seems the team has been busy behind my back. They've just dropped this audio into the running order called David's Best Bits, and they're insisting I play it. So, well, with a little anxiety, because I'm not sure I like surprises, I will just say one of my favorite words. Play.
My name is Suchira Maguire. I work for the Thai service. I've done interviews with David many times, but there's one particular interview that sticks in my mind, and I think I will remember it forever.
Oh, actually, I can smell it now. Are you sure it's not open yet?
David asked me to eat durian and talk about it in an interview. And I said to him, I can't really do this because I hate durian.
The uniqueness of this fruit is a smell, which I call stink. It smells like something's rotten. It's like something that you left in the fridge 10 days ago and you forgot to eat it. And then suddenly you remember, oh, I have to eat this thing now. You open it up and that's the smell.
So after I've explained my situation to him, David said to me, in that case, let's do it on camera. And he will provide me with a stick bucket in case I couldn't make it to the end. It's tempting, isn't it? And it's David. You can't really say no to him, can you?
Okay, look, I think we've reached that moment in time where we're going to torture Sushira even more by opening this thing or attempting to open it. Sushira really hates this. We have the bucket ready. Thai journalist eats durian for the first time on a BBC radio program.
My name is Amir Pirzada and I am a journalist based in Srinagar of Indian administered Kashmir, and I work with Indian languages. So for the first time when I came on the 5th floor was in 2018. I and my colleague Neha Sharma, we did a piece on Yarsa Gamba, which is only found in Nepal's Himalayas. And I honestly was nervous because it was my first such recording for a radio program. And David, he made us dedicate songs, poetry to each other. And we did that.
तेरे जैसा यार कहाँ कहाँ ऐसा याराना.
Neha sang a song for me. I just narrated few stanzas in Urdu poetry.
उसका तारीफ क्या करूं, उसके तारीफ मैं क्या करूं, वो तो इस दिल्ली की एक आजाद लड़की है.
And the meaning is?
Oh my god, it's got a lot of context, and of course you clearly don't understand. It's really funny.
He makes you feel so comfortable, you start talking openly. So this is David.
My name is Fabil Ismailov. I am the BBC Russian news editor. Imagine the BBC Russian newsroom, which is a big room with all different teams, social media, video, TV, and the news online team working together. And I am having a bit of a particular table because I have a bad back and it's a bit raised, and I feel myself as a captain of the ship looking, forward and saying, guys, we're going that way. And when I look at the door, I can see David Amano with the mic in his hand entering the newsroom and just walking briskly towards me. And I think, I know the 5th floor people, they're going to ask me something unexpected. So I sort of brace myself and get ready for his question.
The horse has a very significant place in the formation of the Russian nation. How does the horse go?
I remember that particular question about how the horse sounds in Russian. Igogo.
Say it again.
Igogo.
You're kidding. Where does that come from?
I don't know. David said, what's this ego-go, you know?
How does nay become ego-go?
Ego-go is how it's described in children's books, in general in literature as well.
Ew.
But that's
This is why ego
He's a
go.
real soul.
Okay, do it for me one more time.
Ew.
I got it. It's a very good horse.
No, that was natural horse. He could do voiceovers for horses, actually. And people were looking at me as if I went mad. But at least we found out definitely how Russian literature reflects the sounds of horses.
My name is Azizullah Khan and I am working for the BBC Urdu service in Peshawar, the northwest of Pakistan. I was booked for the fifth floor. I thought that it would be a same kind of interview on honeybees because I have given a lot of interviews to the different languages, English, Hindi, Pashto, Urdu, all these languages, but this was amazing.
Azizullah, it's been quite some time since I got anybody to sing or make a fool of themselves on this program, but I just wondered, what kind of sound do the local bees make?
It's like, he questioned me how these honeybees have their sounds. In the first instance, I thought that it could be a crazy one. Then I enjoyed it.
Some people in our childhood, if we are going to get revenge from any of our friends, we put a stone on these honeybee hives and we run away from that, and our friends who do not know what's happening, all these honeybees are gathered on his head, and it's quite difficult because we have experienced that kind of things.
We were talking, we were laughing. I told my colleague that it was one of my best interviews that I have given because it was not a routine, not a very serious, it was laughing and everything was amazing.
How did that sound go again?
The biggest thing I will miss about David is the warmth of his voice and the warmth of his style of interview. Because, believe me, I do dozens of interviews, and I've done hundreds, if not thousands of them over my career at the BBC. But the difference is, David talks to you and asks you questions about very serious things, as if he's just your big brother, just sitting next to you. He's like a warm conduit. Through him, you speak to the audiences of the world, and that's very, very heartfelt, And I'll be missing them. Big deal.
Everyone will miss him. I especially will miss him because I got a chance to talk about my story, and the way David basically pokes you, the way David asks you questions, he knows how to touch that chord of humanity or empathy. He brings that out. I lost my father when I was 12 years old. And since then, I wanted to speak about this story. And for the first time, publicly on a broadcast, I managed to talk about it with David. Nobody investigated my father's killing. Nobody. It was just unknown gunman, which is mystery, which I'll never accept.
Do you think this experience influenced your decision later to become a journalist?
I remember in class 6, I used to write about it and I wanted to tell this story to the world. And this is what made me to be a journalist, to be someone who tells stories of people who are suffering, who are in trouble. And here I am. Now, David is going and we surely will miss him. And I just want to thank him for listening to my stories every time. And he has been passionate enough for listening to them. And I just want to tell him that I'll miss him.
Amir, Famil, Aziz, Sushira, thank you so much for those kind words and those wonderful conversations. Next week, Farhanak Hamidi will take the chair, so please join the fifth floor. Same time, I'm David Amano, and I'm out of here.
BBC World Service and now Witness History with me, Simon Watts. This week we've been looking back at the momentous events 10 years ago that swept across the Middle East and North Africa and became known as the Arab Spring. Today we're going back to where it all began, Tunisia, and the story behind a song that inspired protesters across the region. In December 2010, a young fruit seller called Mohamed Bouazizi set himself alight outside a government office in a small town in southern Tunisia after local officials seized his cart and produce. This one event would trigger a wave of popular anger that spread across Tunisia and then the wider Middle East. One of the anthems of the Arab Spring was Kalimti Hora, or My Word is Free, by a young Tunisian singer called Emel Mathlouthi. It was at one of the big demonstrations in the capital, Tunis, that Emel stood among a huge crowd of protesters and sang her song.
The song is a tribute to the power of people when they're united and the desire and the thirst for freedom. It was just me singing from my heart.
Someone captured Emel's passion on their phone and posted it on the internet. Within hours, the video went viral.
I started receiving messages on my social media from all over the world. Egypt and then Syria, and people reporting to me in real time while they were doing their first protests. Those were really beautiful days. My song was doing its own journey and was inspiring other people in other places.
Emel Mathlouthi had started her career in a teenage heavy metal band, but in her 20s she was influenced by the American protest singers of the 1960s.
The answer, my friends, is blowing in the wind.
That was my first inspiration, and especially John Baez, because as a woman, it was very powerful for me to see a woman with just her guitar and her voice and her emotions drive big audience throughout the world to sing together and to be moved.
Emel was a fierce opponent of President Ben Ali of Tunisia. In power since 1987, his government was marked by corruption, political repression, and the lack of economic opportunities for young people. Emel had moved to France to make the kind of protest music she wanted.
One of my very early songs that was really openly denouncing the corruption, which means enough, because I wanted to really challenge the government.
Emel's songs had become popular online, and in December 2010 she returned to Tunisia for a tour just as the first anti-government protests were starting in the south of the country.
It was much bigger than we ever saw, because it was like every day, it was city after city, like demonstration here, demonstration there. It was very exciting.
Emel was booked for a concert in the city of Sfax. Like many young Tunisians, she felt moved by Mohamed Bouazizi's death. Here was a 26-year-old who'd set himself on fire because corrupt officials had taken away his livelihood. He seemed to symbolize the frustrations of a generation.
I was very sick that day, but it was very important for me to be on stage because I was very determined to pay a tribute to Bouazizi. I remember that the young promoter was very worried and there was police around. They tried to tell me to not play any of my protest songs, but it was very important for me to talk about Bouazizi as our Che Guevara. It was like a question of life or death to me to be on that stage. And there were lots of young people who started shouting slogans from the uprisings.
Shortly afterwards, the protest reached Tunis. It was the first time major unrest had broken out in the capital itself.
We traveled back to Tunis, and that's where we participated in very early protests. Usually things never reach the capital, and it really felt like scary, but at the same time that we weren't alone and there was no coming back.
This was a revolution led by young Tunisians active on social media. Emel decided to get back into the studio to record more protest songs, while other Tunisians wrote blogs and posted Facebook videos.
We tried to stay together and stay connected, and we went to each other's houses, and it was a very special time, you know, to stay up late every night People got organized on Facebook, essentially.
But the Tunisian government was determined to stop the young protesters.
I don't think anybody had time to think about their safety. I think it was just like a big euphoria. So we had a bigger goal than ourselves.
But the danger on the streets was real. President Ben Ali's security forces killed about 300 people across the country during a month of protests. So, in January 2011, the activists staged a huge rally in the heart of Tunis to honour their dead comrades. This was the day Emel was asked to sing Kelim Tihora.
People took over the main avenue because with the interior ministry being present there, it's always been like a symbol of oppression. The day I was singing, it was a tribute to the martyrs, because I think it's very important to remind that there's a lot of people who died.
The phone video shows Emel dressed in a bright red coat and scarf, holding a candle and singing to a crowd who sit peacefully on the avenue. "We are free people who are not afraid," say the lyrics. "We are free and our word is free."
A few days after that, I had to leave again, back to Paris to finish recording my album. And my sister announced that the video was all over the internet, and it was unbelievable. I was very proud, and I was very touched by the fact that my song was doing its own journey and was inspiring other people in other places.
On the 14th of January, President Ben Ali was forced to flee Tunisia. The activists pushed successfully for a new constitution, gender equality laws and democratic elections. But recently the Tunisian revolution has soured, and in other countries the Arab Spring has been followed by authoritarianism, civil war or total collapse. But Emel still believes change can come to the Middle East, and she hopes Kelim Tihora will inspire it.
After all these years, I look at it as something beautiful that will remain beautiful, that nothing could erase. Even if the revolutions can turn bad and we have to do things all over again, that song still remains a witness of the time where we were all together and of the dream, because dreams must stay alive.
Emel Mathlouthi is still making music and touring the world. That edition of Witness History was presented by me, Simon Watts.
This is the BBC World Service. I was walking around that hospital like a zombie.
I'm Marie Keyworth. I'll be exploring the idea that we can feel too much empathy and compassion.
Right now, I can't face picking another parent up off the floor.
And how can we steel ourselves against the distress without becoming hard-hearted?
The fatigue that we have is not letting ourselves feel that.
Compassion Fatigue, Sunday at 14 GMT. And there's a full roundup of today's sports news in 30 minutes. Here's Lee James.
The Premier League champions Liverpool end their poor run with victory over Spurs. So can they challenge for the title again? We'll look ahead to the weekend's action, including Palmeiras and Santos meeting in only the third all-Brazilian Copa Libertadores final.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
BBC World Service at 19 hours GMT. I'm Jonathan Savage with the newsroom. Under pressure and understocked, the EU moves to restrict the movement of vaccines to countries outside its borders.
This is a race against the clock. We cannot lose time because of vaccines not being delivered on agreed schedule.
Meanwhile, more promising trial results will ask how the Johnson & Johnson jab could help around the world. Argentina's wealthiest are being tapped for COVID relief cash, plus victory for Nigerian farmers after a 13-year legal battle with one of the world's biggest oil companies.
It is a kind of miracle. I am happy, because it had been a long-time battle.
And who'd go so far as to buy books by the metre just to make themselves look better on video calls?
Engineers, teachers, CEOs, celebrities, all the way up to major players in government.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. We start with a summary of the latest world news.
Hello, I'm Justine Green with the BBC News. The EU is bringing in export controls on coronavirus vaccines produced within the bloc. The mechanism will compel pharmaceutical companies to seek permission before supplying doses elsewhere. The move comes amid a supply dispute between the EU and two vaccine suppliers, AstraZeneca and Pfizer, with Brussels saying it must guard against the undermining of its supplies. Katya Adler is in Brussels.
The so-called transparency mechanism gives EU countries powers to deny the authorization now needed for vaccine exports if the company manufacturing them hasn't yet honoured existing contracts with the EU. Valdis Dombrovskis is the EU Commissioner for Trade.
The protection and safety of our citizens is a priority. This is a race against the clock. We cannot lose time because of vaccines not being delivered on agreed schedule.
The EU insists this is not an export ban. It says it's a temporary scheme. Vaccine deliveries to a number of neighbouring and less well-off countries are exempt from the new regulations.
The World Health Organization has expressed concern at the imposition of export controls on vaccines, with one official accusing richer countries of fighting over the cake when health workers in poorer countries didn't even have the crumbs. Imogen Folks reports.
Long before any vaccines were approved for use, the WHO appealed for equitable access. It even set up its own initiative to try to ensure poorer countries did not lose out. But now Europe and the UK are squabbling over supplies, richer countries are rumoured to be offering ever higher prices, and some, like Canada, have already purchased far more doses than they need for their entire population. It's not the fair distribution the WHO hoped for. Today, it said hoarding vaccines would simply prolong the pandemic.
AstraZeneca has said it has fixed most of the issues affecting its European vaccine manufacturing plants. The head of the company, Pascal Soriot, said productivity should improve rapidly over the coming months following a shortfall in supplies to the EU. He said the bottleneck had been more connected with the initial stages of production than with the later finishing stages. A Moscow court has ordered the arrests of a number of close political associates of the jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Mr. Navalny's brother Oleg and his office coordinator Oleg Stepanov are under house arrest. Other prominent Navalny supporters face charges of organising a protest during an epidemic. The move comes hours after the Russian authorities warned anti-government protesters and supporters of Mr. Navalny that they could face charges of taking part in mass unrest. Tens of thousands of Russians rallied last weekend in support of President Putin's most vocal domestic critic. World News from the BBC. The Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation has won the 2020 Olof Palme Human Rights Prize. Jos Haviland has the details.
The Olof Palme Prize organisers noted that some 20 million people had taken part in Black Lives Matter protests in the US alone and millions more globally. The actual slogan Black Lives Matter has never been trademarked, but this prize worth $100,000 goes to the more formal organisation that uses the phrase in its title. The prize organisers said this decentralised movement, 8 years old, had exposed the hardship experienced by African Americans and their pain and anger at not being valued equally, and had also shown that racism and racist violence were a global problem.
A one-off tax on Argentina's richest people has been imposed to help pay for medical supplies and relief for small businesses struggling under the pandemic. Here's Candice Piet.
Argentina's centre-left president, Alberto Fernandez, hopes to raise around $3 billion from the new tax. The money will go to provide medical supplies, relief for small businesses, scholarships for students and social aid. The measure's been criticised by the opposition, which described it as confiscatory. But the country's been badly hit by the pandemic, which has deepened already high rates of poverty. Almost 40% of the country's population lives under the poverty line. Oxfam's annual report on economic inequality said Argentina was showing the way towards progressive taxation of the rich as the key to an equitable recovery from the current crisis.
The German radio broadcaster ARD says it will use female commentators for the first time to cover the delayed men's Euro 2020 finals and next year's World Cup. It comes after a retiring commentator, Sabine Topovine, expressed doubt that she would live to see a World Cup final commentated on by a woman. The broadcaster said it had underlined its desire to continue to promote women in sports journalism. BBC News.
Hello, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Jonathan Savage. Showing a typical flair for the soundbite, the head of the World Health Organization has said the planet is not just at a turning point in the pandemic, but in its history too. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus meant it as a warning. Countries should come together to inoculate globally and avoid the temptations of vaccine nationalism. So this decision will not be to his liking. The EU has confirmed that it will control the export of vaccines out of the European Union, saying it has no other choice after supply shortages with Pfizer and its very public dispute with the British-Swedish drug maker AstraZeneca. The EU Trade Commissioner is Valdis Dombrovskis.
The protection and safety of our citizens is a priority. And the challenges we now face left us with no other choice but to act. Vaccines are key to the recovery and to bringing the pandemic under control. Delivering these vaccines to our citizens is the most critical task right now. This is a race against the clock. We cannot lose time because of vaccines not being delivered on agreed schedule.
Dr. Mike Ryan of the WHO urged those protecting their own supplies of vaccines to think of health workers around the world who may be more in need.
They're right down the end of the queue right now, and they're looking up to the top of the queue. And the people at the top of the queue are fighting about where they are in the queue. I mean, that's what it looks like. Fighting over the cake when they don't even have access to the crumbs.
Dr. Mike Ryan. I've been speaking to our Europe correspondent Gavin Lee and asked him to explain what effect these export controls will have.
What it means is, likely to come into force next month, it gives member states the power to basically say yes or no to a big pharmaceutical company and its plans to take the vaccine doses and export them outside of the European Union. And the decision will be based on whether the company can prove that it actually has delivered on its vaccine contract, the pre-agreement with the EU before the vaccine doses are then exported. So that will affect actually a lot of companies. Pfizer, for example, it's got a big factory here in Belgium. Every day those trucks go to the UK. What Stella Kyriakides, who's a health commissioner, described it as was an insurance policy for Europe for 450 million people, taxpayers who are desperately short of the vaccine now. And it is in place as well because of those problems with AstraZeneca, with the fact that they're going to get a quarter of what was promised to them for the EU in the next 2 months, and also with the Pfizer problems that happened earlier. And it's worth saying that there are 92 countries exempt from this, including Switzerland. There had been one question by a journalist saying, is this the UK being deliberately targeted because of the AstraZeneca issues? And the EU Commissioner said, no, this is our insurance policy.
So that's the politics of it, but people are waiting for vaccines, they're waiting for jabs inside the EU, outside the EU. What could this mean for citizens?
The situation on the ground clearly means that if you're getting supply problems, like at the moment, 2 weeks of postponement of vaccines in Spain, you have the French and the Germans having about a quarter of their rollout at the moment, and similar situations with other parts of the bloc, Hungary, for example, as well. You know, we're going to have production for the next 2 months where the big companies are saying that they are struggling. I think it helps that you've got more companies coming on market saying that they are ready. We've heard from the Belgian company Janssen today. But I think in the short term, there's still going to be that push-pull factor as this new rule from the EU comes in.
If you look at the table of the percentage of citizens that have been vaccinated, EU countries, their rollout is relatively slow compared to, say, the UK or the US. If they had been as quick as the UK or US in terms of buying vaccines, in terms of approving vaccines, would this even be an issue?
Well, actually, Kate Bingham, who's the chair of the UK Vaccine Task Force, said today to the BBC that the UK has been so far ahead because they got the contract back in May. They got voluntary coalitions, she said, of different companies because they knew the scale of this. And she said it allowed them to be nimble and to support each other. So the tacit implication was that others, perhaps the EU, were slower on this. And a brief word on the fact that Germany, Spain, Italy,